Okay, we're back. So, like we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking to Manuel Delgado in a little bit, and he's a luthier. He makes instruments.
Wood instruments. What, does he make anything like other than wood?
No, I don't. I mean, I think he's just mainly does guitars.
Guitar, ukuleles.
Yeah, anything.
I think violins, guitarrones. I think it's just wood instruments.
Wooden instruments, right? Yeah. So, and obviously he makes very high quality instruments, unlike some of the instruments I had when I was starting up.
What was your first instrument, sir?
Well, obviously my very first instrument was a drum set that my mom bought me for my birthday. Let me see. How old was I? It was when I was a freshman in high school. Whatever age you turn in high school, freshman in high school. 14. You turn 14, I think? Or you start 14 and turn... No, I think you start 13 and turn 14.
No, you start 14 and then you turn 15. Because the quinceañeras happen freshman year.
Okay. So it was my freshman year. And my birthday's in February. And that summer, before my birthday, I started getting a bug about playing drums. And I would set up these cardboard boxes in my bedroom. And I'd just play along with the recordings on boxes.
Oh.
And I just kept telling my mom, I want a drum set. I want to play drums. I want to play drums. And eventually for my birthday, all of a sudden a drum set appeared in my bedroom.
Yeah.
It was just like the most awesome gift that anybody's ever given me. But it was a student level drum set. I mean, it was a brand I've never even heard of. And, I hadn't heard of any brands back then, but all of my friends that I knew, my rock friends, when I told them, hey, I got a drum set, we can start playing now, and then start learning music. And they were all like, oh, great, man. What kind did you get? You get a Ludwig or a Yamaha? Did you get a Tama? Those were all like the big names. Or Pearl at the time and all that. And the first drum set I got was called a Ruther. Ruether, something like that. Ruther. And I remember everybody's like, what?
What's a Ruther?
What's a Ruther drum set? It was a drum set. I mean, it was a beginning drum set, but it served me well for many years because I learned on it.
How long did you have that drum set?
I had that drum set probably about 5 years before I switched to the Yamaha drum set that I had. And then now I have a different Yamaha drum set. And I have two drum sets now. I have what is it? Well, I have two Yamahas right now. And then, but yeah, that was my first drum set was a Ruther. It did its job. That said, what was your first instrument?
My first instrument was actually gifted to me from my dad. Those of you who do not know, my parents are separated. My dad does live in Mexico. And when I started sixth grade violin class, my mom said, well, contact your dad and let's see if he can get you an instrument from Mexico because they were much cheaper over there. And sure enough, he bought me my first instrument. I loved it. It was a very special instrument to me. But that being said, again, it wasn't a beginner level instrument. It was definitely not a high quality one.
Do you still have it?
My mom still has it.
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where exactly what happened. So the story here goes. I was in high school. And that violin that I had served me through my middle school years. But once I was in high school, my director was like, oh, that violin is not really going to cut it. You're going to have to get another instrument. And so the person that they referred us to was another luthier. I don't even know his name. It starts with an R. Another luthier in the DFW area. And the plan that we did was also, it was a student, but it was a student instrument, but an advanced student instrument. And we did the rent to own.
Okay.
And so that was the path that we took. That was the violin that I mainly used for a while, that instrument.
Like even in college?
And even in college, and you didn't like my violin. You're like, I
remember.
can't hear you. You were like, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
You need to play louder. So that's the one I had. One time when we were playing, we were gigging, my string popped. And we had multiple gigs that we had to do with the school. And my sister was one of the people giving rides. And I said, hey, my string popped. Can you take off one of the strings from my other violin, which happened to be with me that day? Well, she doesn't know anything about instruments. So she couldn't take off that one string. So she took off all the other strings.
Okay.
And so
and give those to you?
No. Well, if anybody that doesn't know about like violins, if you take off all those instruments, the sound post falls off.
Right.
Everything just
falls apart. The strings are holding it together.
The strings are holding it together. And so she took off all the other strings and my violin just
Fell apart.
Yeah, it just fell apart. And so that was that story. But that violin that my mom did the rent to own, that took me through college, and I played that, and it got me well enough. That violin is also at my mom's house. But it wasn't until
Was that next violin you owned? That one time I went with you to a person Mr. Guzman knows?
Yes.
That was your third violin?
Yeah, that was my third violin.
Oh, okay.
And that was my personal birthday gift to myself because I really needed a violin. And I contacted Mr. Guzman, and he figured out where to go. We went to that one house, and I love my violin.
You know that gentleman that showed us all those violins? You know he passed away from COVID?
What?
Yeah.
When?
During COVID time, a couple years ago, he passed away.
No way.
No, I'm serious. You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, Mr. Guzman, you know how Mr. Guzman got real sick with COVID?
Yes.
Mr. Guzman thinks he caught it from him because he was over at his house trying out more violins like a week before Mr. Guzman got really sick.
Oh my
This
gosh.
was like early in COVID.
Yeah.
And that gentleman passed away from COVID.
Oh.
It was so early in the whole thing. That's back when COVID was really, really powerful, really strong.
Yes.
Now it's very contagious, but it's not as strong as it used to be.
deadly. Yeah.
And so, that man, he had
Rest
all
in
those
peace.
violins. He was a really nice man. Remember, he pulled out all those violins and
And he
had you
had
try
names?
a bunch of them.
And he even had names for them. There was one that was like Bull or something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
He had named all his violins, and I remember
very
it was
good prices.
great prices. And when you tried it out, it had an enormous sound.
And that's why people like my violin. Like, it has a huge sound, and I love it. I love it. I remember people ask me if I want to sell it, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to sell it because it's such a good violin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Violins are slightly different than drums in one big aspect. When you have a violin, the strings and the resonance of the body and all that, they all combine to create the sound of the instrument. I mean, you can kind of say that about drums, the resonance of the shells and all that, but it's not as big a deal. In all honesty, a drum set can sound really good, even a student level drum set, if you have the right drum heads and you tune your drums and you have the right drum heads, and more importantly, if you have the right technique to play the drum.
Agreed.
If you have a good technique to play the drum and you have the right heads and they're in tune, even a student level drum set can sound good. Because the resonance of the body of the instrument is not as big a part of it as it is in violin. Violin, yeah, that's a big part of it.
I will say another thing that does help violin is strings. If you have a good set of strings, you can do a lot with the violin. Is it going to sound perfect? No, but could you rejuvenate it? Heck yeah, you can.
Yeah.
And I personally like the helicord ones.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it's a good name too.
helicord. Yeah.
Helicord. Yeah. And of course, your bow.
Yes,
all that stuff
your bow
can make a
bow's
difference.
Big time. It can make a difference. So yeah, you can sound good on a budget. You really can.
You can. And if you're just getting started, or if anybody that's out there, if you have a child that's just getting started, you can start with decent quality student level instruments. You don't have to go for the high big price things. There are some really good student level instruments. Just be aware that if you're going too inexpensive, sometimes you're getting what you paid for.
Oh yeah,
there are some instruments that are just way too inexpensive.
And especially for a child, you definitely want to get them something that they're gonna, see if they're even gonna want to do it.
Yeah.
For example, my nephew, I love him so much, but my nephew, whenever Coco came out, and he was so fixated on, he wanted to learn the guitar. He really wanted to learn the guitar. And I remember that for Christmas, his mom, she sent me to Guitar Center, and I got him the mini Coco guitar.
There was a Coco guitar.
Yeah, like the one from Coco. So it has the white, and it was Ernesto de la Cruz. And
oh, okay, yeah.
And it was that guitar. And where is it now? In the closet.
In the closet.
Closet, yeah.
The drum set my mom bought me, that it cost her $200. She later told me it cost her $200, which, I mean, even nowadays, $200 is not that much. But back then it was a lot more because this was talking about 1980.
Without inflation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In 1980, $200 was more. But $200 was not, also even in 1980, not a ridiculous amount of money. My mom wanted to make sure that this is something I was going to
Yeah.
stick with. And so she got me started. She's obviously, my mom's a musician, so she knows that you have an investment. And so she got me started, and then after that, by 4 or 5 years later, I bought my own drum set and been buying my own drum set since then, obviously. But it was a good enough drum set to get started, and it really taught me a lot. So I was really pleased with it for many years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And see, that's what a lot of times in schools, especially at the middle school level, that's why inventory is so important, because these kids are barely trying it out. Like it's a certain band could be a phase, it could just be something that they're interested for a little bit. And so when teachers have an inventory that they can rent out to families, that helps a lot, because they don't have that commitment to purchase this big thing.
And that kind of reminds me of something I was going to ask you when you were telling the story a second ago. So your middle school did not provide violins to the beginners?
No, they did. And I had a violin for my 6th grade. But they
Okay.
provide it mainly for 6th grade. By 7th grade, if you're going to keep going, they highly encourage you to get your own violin or rent to own something,
I
because
see.
they have such a big group of 6th graders coming
Right,
in
right.
that they
Okay, I
need
get
that
it.
inventory. But I will say, the middle school that I went to had a lot of instruments.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, well, you study with Dr. Gradante.
Yeah.
Dr. Gradante, he's really into the making of instruments and all that. So that's something he really prides himself in. So yeah, he had a lot of instruments. As a matter of fact, Dr. Gradante, in his, you went to J.P. Elder, right?
J.P. Elder Middle School.
J.P. Elder, that's what Dr. Gradante. When I was talking to him one time, he was telling me he had some instruments from Miss Quintero's grandfather.
Yes.
Miss Quintero's grandfather was a luthier, and Pedro Moreno, he had made instruments. Their shop was there in San Antonio. This is years before a mariachi connection ever existed. And some of the instruments that Mr. Gradante has were made by Miss Quintero's grandfather.
I'm pretty sure that some are still there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know where they are, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
That's
Dr.
awesome.
Gradante retired, I don't know how many years ago.
He had to have retired. For sure, he has like 10 now.
Really?
He has to have at least 10 years retired.
I remember one time we were up at the Fort Worth thing, and he was telling us he was going to retire. So it was a while back, because we haven't done the Fort Worth thing in a while. With COVID in a way, it's just you lose track of how long ago things were, because it's like COVID made like 2 years disappear.
Well, 10 years ago, back in the good old days, I was a sophomore. I was about to finish my sophomore year. No, my sophomore year or my junior year? No,
You mean at Texas State?
no, at Northside,
Oh, I think he was still teaching when you were in high school.
when I was in high school.
I think he retired like maybe your freshman year at Texas State.
Then that must so he has to have like 8 years retired now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, we'll have to catch up with him sometime. He's a great person and
Yeah.
get to know. He's always going to Mexico and talking to people and
Yes.
and learning new things. So we'll have to catch up with him sometime.
We will.
soon.
In the meantime, though, we are excited to bring in Mr. Manuel.
Oh,
Delgado.
yes. Speaking of Luthers and
Yes.
new instruments and all that, yes, Mr. Manuel Delgado. He's had a family shop for many, many years. I'm sure he's going to tell us all about it. He comes from a long life of instrument makers. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he said his own daughters are getting into it now as well.
Yeah.
So-
I love that his daughters are the poster children of the. If you ever order posters from Manuel, those are his daughters. I think.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like there's one with like the instruments of what each instrument is, and then there's one that says voice, and that's his daughter.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get started with Mr. Manuel Delgado then.
Yes. And here we
All right.
go.